US President Joe Biden has addressed the ongoing crisis in Kabul, promising to evacuate any Americans still trapped at the airport. He went on to say that the US remains committed to evacuating all Afghans who have assisted the US war effort. President Biden has been facing a storm of criticism over his handling of the evacuation. Thousands have crowded Kabul's international airport after the Taliban seized the city this week. Here is the president.
This is one of the largest, most difficult airlifts in history, and the only country in the world capable of projecting this much power on the far side of the world with this degree of precision is the United States of America. We've already evacuated more than 18,000 people since July and approximately 13,000 since our military airlift began on August the 14th.
Meanwhile, NATO foreign ministers have issued a joint declaration calling on the Taliban to allow evacuees to leave amid chaotic scenes at the airport.
Many people in Kabul are hoping to make it on a plane bound for Europe or the United States. Thousands have already managed, but many more are waiting for their chance. Tens of thousands have gathered outside Kabul airport, increasingly desperate to flee the country. When the Taliban let anyone through, it's usually only foreign passport holders.
German Ambassador Potzel has also urged the Taliban to allow safe access to the airport to those we want to fly to Germany. There are some positive signals in this regard, but we have not been able to verify how reliable these signals are, because the situation on the ground in Kabul, especially around the airport, is still extremely chaotic.
The situation at the airport is extremely tense. Sounds of gunfire can be heard, warning shots fired by both US forces and the Taliban. On Friday, a German civilian was shot on his way to the airport, though he's reportedly received medical treatment and is not in danger.
I don't think people understand the chaos that is reigning right now in the capital. The brutality and the efficient lethality the Taliban, are using right now to ensure their rise to power.
For those unable to reach the airport, a lucky few could be airlifted in the coming days by the German army using 2 helicopters being deployed to Afghanistan.
The helicopters will only be used in the city of Kabul. That means there is no chance, and I say this because I have been asked already, to use the helicopter to fly over the Hindu Kush mountains to Mazar-e-Sharif to pick people up there. That will not happen.
The situation is especially dangerous for employees of Western organizations and their families. The Taliban shot and killed a relative of a Deutsche Welle journalist while searching for the reporter. The German army has so far brought some 1,700 people to safety. Refugees are being housed in reception centers such as this one in the eastern German state of Brandenburg.
The most important thing is that we offer people a safe haven, that they are well looked after here, can have a good night's sleep, have somewhere to go. And we must also check to make sure they are healthy.
German officials are conducting an inquiry into how the Afghanistan crisis unfolded so quickly, with a report due next Wednesday. Chancellor Angela Merkel will then make a statement to the Bundestag. Members of Parliament are expected to ask many questions.
Let's take a closer look at this with Omad Samad, who's a former senior advisor to the chief executive of Afghanistan and a former Afghan ambassador to France and Canada. Welcome to DW, Ambassador. US President Joe Biden said the evacuation operations are under control. Is that a correct assessment, in your opinion?
Well, it's an operation that started out unexpectedly with a lot of issues. It seems like over the last 4 or 5 days, they've tried to bring it under control. Is it under full control? Probably not. There are moments probably when there is chaos and there is disorganization, but it seems like it is improving. Now, how long is this going to take? How many people will take advantage of this? Will the Taliban cooperate as they have to some extent at this point? and to what extent are the internationals going to help in resettling most of these who end up in transit hubs in the Gulf for now. So the situation out of Afghanistan is not also that easy yet for the thousands of Afghans who have left.
Understood. And the international situation always round appears confused. We have Russia and China saying that they will work with the Taliban, where lots of Western governments have closed their embassies. Let's start with Russia and China. Do you think that that is the right decision to work with Afghanistan's apparent new government?
Well, each country is going to have to decide for itself. Each country, especially great powers and middle powers and regional powers, as well as the neighbors of Afghanistan, are going to look at the situation very differently than a European country or Canada or the United States even nowadays. So I think that when it comes to China and probably all of Afghanistan's neighbors, they do not want chaos. They prefer stability. They prefer some level of security. They don't want any terrorist threats. They don't want refugees. They do not want drugs crossing their borders. So for them, each one has a different set of priorities. And the Russians probably the same to a large extent. But when it comes to others, obviously NATO countries have had a long stay in Afghanistan. They look at Afghanistan from a different perspective. To them, the issues having to do with democracy building, with human rights, women's rights, all of those are priorities. And the Taliban now have a responsibility to take all of this into account. They can't just be one-sided and stick to very extreme and radical ideas and policies. I think that if they want recognition and if they want assistance that is much needed by the Afghan people, they will have to show flexibility domestically at home as well as externally in its relationship with the international community.
It is difficult, isn't it? Because when you have Western countries like Germany that says it will halt financial aid to Afghanistan now that it's ruled by the Taliban, you've got to ask yourself, well, who does that hurt? Does that hurt the Taliban? Does it hurt the people of Afghanistan? Afghanistan, after all, is a country that's where aid is something like 80% of its GDP.
Absolutely. There is a moral dilemma here as well as a policy challenge. If aid is aimed at helping the people of the country, is not just a pure political tool or a security tool, then you have to weigh the pros and cons, and you have to use sticks and carrots at times, and you have to work with the authorities in a way that both sides can find common ground. And this is going to be the challenge over the next few weeks and months with the Taliban as they consolidate power. We still don't know whether they're going to consolidate power in a purely Taliban style or whether they're going to open the political space to others who can participate. That will be a big indication, in my view. And then obviously, when it comes to aid and assistance, they cannot rely just on one or two countries. They would have to also be accommodating and flexible enough so that the usual donors, such as Germany and others, can also have a different viewpoint and participate and contribute again to the Afghan people.
Ambassador Omar Samad, thank you so much for your insights. Thanks for joining DW.
Thank you.
Well, the Taliban's rout of Afghan security forces took everyone by surprise. The capital's fallen, ousted President Ashraf Ghani's left the country, and the militants now control most of the country. But a resistance movement is growing, and one of its leaders is the son of a man who many Taliban opponents consider a national hero.
Ahmad Massoud was born in Panjshir province, northeast of Kabul. Its steep mountains and narrow valleys have kept its population relatively safe through decades of war. The Soviet Union came with tanks and bombers and couldn't seize control. Even the Taliban were kept out during the civil war of the 1990s. Now it's the last Taliban-free area of the country. Massoud's father, Ahmad Shah Massoud, also known as the Lion of Panjshir, is a national hero in Afghanistan. For 22 years, he fought for his province, eventually co-founding the anti-Taliban Northern Alliance. In 2001, Massoud warned the world that Osama bin Laden might use Afghanistan as a base to launch terrorist attacks. 2 days before the World Trade Center collapsed, he was killed by al-Qaeda agents posing as journalists.
We still remember the French men.
But his legacy didn't die with him. His son, Ahmad Massoud, says he is ready to follow in his father's footsteps. Like his father, he is calling on Western nations to help, saying his forces need ammunition and other supplies. Massoud isn't the only big name holding out in Panjshir. Amrullah Saleh, first vice president in the recently ousted government, has also taken refuge in the province. Saleh has said that he is legally in charge of the country. Clarity. As per the Constitution of Afghanistan, in absence, escape, resignation, or death of the president, the first vice president becomes the caretaker president. I am currently inside my country and am the legitimate caretaker president. I am reaching out to all leaders to secure their support and consensus. But even with the Constitution and the legacy of a famous anti-Taliban fighter on their side, analysts say the Panjshir holdouts are unlikely to present much of a challenge to the Taliban. Massoud has a famous name but few allies, and so far the Western countries haven't shown any signs that they will support an armed resistance.
Now, NATO foreign ministers have been meeting in Brussels today to try and coordinate their response to the crisis unfolding in Afghanistan. So we can get more from our Brussels correspondent, Terry Schultz. Welcome, Terry. What was agreed today?
Phil, foreign ministers basically agreed on a joint statement assessing the situation, saying that they're very concerned at the grave events they see unfolding on the ground, that all of us see unfolding on the ground there, that they are demanding the Taliban treat all Afghans with dignity, that they uphold their commitment to be a new Taliban, and that they allow access to the airport. Now, this is one of the main concerns. We've all seen these flights, the desperation of Afghans trying to get out of the country, and this was what NATO considered its primary task, getting its civilians out, getting out its former employees and all the other vulnerable Afghans. And that's how I began my interview with Secretary General Stoltenberg, asking him how he is going to hold leverage over the Taliban to let people to the airport to escape.
One of the main issues discussed at the meeting today was how can we make more progress on that crucial issue of getting people to the airport and then into the airport. But actually now the problem is not the lack of planes. Many allies have stated clearly that they're ready to receive Afghans. The challenge is to get them there. We expect Taliban to allow free passage. We have some leverage. We will use that. Of course, we have less leverage now in Afghanistan than when we had a military mission, but we will use political tools, diplomatic tools, potential sanctions to do whatever we can to make sure that Taliban live up to their commitments.
This seems to be pretty much a logistical problem, not a political problem, to get people to the airport. And what about the bounty story? Isn't that troubling?
I think there are many reports, and I cannot confirm all of them, but it's obvious that the situation, especially outside the airport, is now very chaotic, very difficult and unpredictable. It is a good thing that we have been able to get more control over the situation at the airport, and also that we have more, planes in place to be able to transport and evacuate. But the big remaining issue addressed at the meeting today was this issue of getting people to and into the airport.
It's not only the Taliban who might be providing obstacles, but the German commanding General Jens Alt said yesterday in a press conference so publicly that they were having trouble with U.S. forces getting people that have been approved by the Bundeswehr to be evacuated into the airport for departure. Is NATO not coordinating some of these things? How do you explain that kind of problem between two NATO allies?
I think that's exactly one of the reasons why it is important that we had the foreign ministerial meeting today, because that at the highest level we were actually able to raise exactly those kind of issues. They were raised in the meeting, and of course I know that United States, other allies who are in charge at the airport, they are now working hard to solve those issues, to get more people into the airport so we can process them and get them on the planes out of Afghanistan.
You said that you're going to be looking into lessons learned, mistakes that were made. Lord Robertson, who, of course, was in your shoes when Article 5 was declared, has come out and said that the U.S. did not respect the in together, out together principle, and that this has weakened the alliance.
Again, the main problem is the suffering of the Afghan people. Then this is also difficult for NATO. There is no doubt about that. And that's the reason why we need to be honest and be clear-eyed and ask those hard questions about what are the lessons learned. But that's a bit for a later stage, because now the main task is to get people out. The message in this meeting was that whatever happens in Afghanistan, we need to maintain a strong bond between North America and Europe in NATO, because we need a strong NATO, not least in the face of the rise of China, a more aggressive Russia, and a shifting global balance of power. So the message is that, yes, we see a crisis in Afghanistan, but no, that should not undermine NATO and the transatlantic unity.
The EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell said in public that the Taliban won the war. Do you agree with that?
The main reason why we went in there was to prevent Afghanistan from being a safe haven for international terrorists, and our aim is to make sure that that is preserved also in the future.
Did the Taliban win?
The reason why we attacked them back 20 years ago was that they were hosting Al-Qaeda. They were actually supporting international terrorist groups attacking us. Now they have promised, they have agreed to not do the same again. We will follow that very closely. We will be vigilant, and we have also means to react if they don't respect that part of the agreement.
Thank you very much for your time. I know it's a busy day.
Thank you.
Well, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg looking very uncomfortable there, Terry, but events in Afghanistan have revealed the alliance's fundamental weakness, that without the US, they can't operate. And the United States has demonstrated that it will act in its own narrow national interest, leaving its supposed allies to flounder.
This is not the first time that we've seen allies have problems operating without a U.S. backup. Libya would be another major case of that. But I think that what might disappoint allies most of all is that they expected a lot more coordination with the Biden administration than they'd had under the Trump administration. And indeed, President Biden followed the Trump plan made unilaterally with the Taliban to get out by this summer. And while I don't necessarily think allies would have wanted to stay longer, remember they went in on behalf of the United States, I think they would have liked to at least be presented to them with some options on the timeline. And that didn't happen.
Yeah, so is the Afghanistan withdrawal and this perception now of the United States as an unreliable partner, is that increasing calls for Europe to take charge of its own defence?
Well, again, Phil, I think if we're comparing this to the Trump administration, the Biden administration certainly isn't considered unreliable, but they would have liked to see a bigger improvement over that. And Europe knows it needs to increase its own ability to defend itself. Once again, in Afghanistan, it was there on behalf of the United States. So that wasn't necessarily the main point there. But this is certainly something that Europe will have to look at. And you heard Secretary General Stoltenberg say he is going to do a review of these 20 years in Afghanistan and figure out what went wrong, what went right, and how NATO can improve.
All right. Thank you for that, Terry. Terry Schultz in Brussels.